Okay, I'm here today with a friend of mine, Judith Ursitti, and Judith is the Director of State Government Affairs with Autism Speaks. And Judith, thank you.
Yes,
It's been a while since we've talked, actually.
I know. It's been too long.
I always start these with how we met, and you and I met in 2016, I believe. You were working, you were in the state working on our autism bill, and I
Yep.
don't know. I don't know how we got hooked up together, but I said I definitely want to meet her, and you you were gracious enough to kind of walk me through um, what the bill was.
Yep.
I think a lot of people. This might be interesting for people to know. I think a lot of people. I don't know what they think about Autism Speaks, but what I found very interesting was how much you guys are involved in things like this autism bill and getting bills passed and working to help families with autism on a state and on a national level. Um,
Yeah.
and that's kind of your job, right? So tell me what
Yeah.
you do.
Um, you know what? I am one of those human beings who is, and I mean this, I'm so fortunate to do something I really love. So it never feels like work. It just feels like, the gift of being able to work on something I love. And so I'll go back to when my son Jack was diagnosed. He was diagnosed with autism at the age of 2. We lived in Texas at the time. Don't hold it against me, Oklahoma. I'm from Texas. Although I always have to say, so my dad is the Texan. My mom was born in Wilson, Oklahoma, and lives in Tulsa. So I'm half Okie, like half Choctaw. I've got some Choctaw, you can tell. But anyway, Oklahoma, I spent many of my summers, well, pretty much every summer growing up at Lake Texoma with my grandparents. So I'm an honorary Okie, I think. But anyway, my son Jack was diagnosed at 2. We were living in Texas at the time, just outside of Dallas. And it was a struggle to get any kind of services for him at all. In fact, they referred me to early intervention for Jack. Early intervention did this evaluation on him. It was called the Childhood Autism Rating Scale, the CARS evaluation. And I think the top number was 40, or it might have been 50. I'll say 40 though, I can't remember. But he scored a 39 out of a 40. So he was almost as severe as you could get as a 2-year-old with autism. And so, we tried to access services through early intervention. They gave us 1 hour of speech therapy a month. So, which was just, and then they kept coming. They would come visit me like every 2 weeks to provide counseling to me. And they'd say, "How are you doing, Mom? Are you doing okay? Can we talk?" And I was like, "I'm good. I'm fine. I just want to get some help for my son." So it was just, we started walking down that road of trying just to access speech and occupational therapy and physical therapy, the things our pediatrician was telling us that Jack needed. And she also mentioned something I'd never heard of called applied behavior analysis. And so we just couldn't find it anywhere. So we went to our public school in Texas when Jack turned 3, and they evaluated Jack. And keep in mind, he scored at 39 out of 40 on his CARS evaluation. Well, our school system said they didn't think he had autism. So we were like, come on, So, and then other things happened. He was officially diagnosed with autism by a pediatric neurologist. And we had started accessing some OT and some speech therapy. But when he was diagnosed with autism, that all stopped because our health plan said, if you have an autism diagnosis, we're not covering it. We're not going to cover anything for autism. And I was like, what? So our school system wouldn't even acknowledge he had autism. our health insurance says if you have autism, we're not covering therapy. So I just felt like we fell into this chasm of where we couldn't get help, you know. So I got involved in Texas, very long story short, with a group of people who'd already been working for many years to pass a law in Texas that required health plans to cover just basics. Like they're not covering horse therapy or dolphin therapy. They're covering speech, OT, PT, and behavioral therapy, diagnosis, that kind of stuff. So I got involved with these families who'd been working on trying to get a law to require health plans to cover those things for autism. And we got it passed. Like it was a miracle. It was Texas. Like we kind of snuck it through. We attached it to this traumatic brain injury bill and snuck it through. But we were the third state in the nation to pass an autism insurance law. And so I had been before that a very exciting certified public accountant, you know, who did tax returns and tracked depreciation and amortization. That was my life. And then I got involved with advocacy, and I got to know personally what it felt like to experience discrimination. And it was even worse because it was discrimination against my son, you know. And I feel like there's a lot of discrimination out there that I have no concept of what it's like to experience, but I got a little taste of it. Just everywhere we turned, the answer was no. So we got this law passed. And again, I'm abbreviating. About that time, my husband's job moved us from, I always say I went from Austin to Boston, like just totally different world. My husband's job took us to Boston. So I never got to stay in Texas to experience, you know, the benefits of the law we passed. But when I moved up here, that was not that long after Autism Speaks had been founded in 2005. And so they reached out to me and said, hey, we saw what happened in Texas, what you were involved with there. Another bill had passed in South Carolina about the same time. And there was a woman there named Lori Unum who had written that law and seen it through. So Autism Speaks reached out to Lori, and they reached out to me, and they brought us in, and they said, hey, can you work on this around the country? Because we think this is a good issue that'll make a difference for families who are affected by autism. And so I was like, I don't know how in the world can I do that? Like, you know, Jack was 4. We had just moved, you know, I was like, I don't know. So I said, okay, I'll try it for a year. And that was 12 years ago. And I have had the honor and the blessing to be involved in just about 20 states that have passed autism insurance laws, it just blows my mind. And what has been such a gift is I've been able to work with people like you, moms and dads, people who have autism, you know, legislators who a lot of people think are creeps, but not all of them are. There's some good guys on both sides of the aisle, good women. Lobbyists, some of them do wear white hats and do the right thing. So I've experienced this life of working hard, filing legislation just to require health insurance to cover the basics, and working with our community on that singular goal. And it's been incredible. It's just been incredible. So 12 years later, we've passed kind of basic legislation in all 50 states. We've got more to do. We've been doing a lot of work on Medicaid, and we're trying to work on other things too. So I'm talking too long. I'm sorry.
No, not at all.
Really
Your story is interesting to me because I think a lot of people don't realize that's how we all get started in advocacy. Is at least a majority is we have a child and we look out for the best interest of our child, and in turn people see that and say, come help me, come do this, come, you know.
Yeah.
And so
I had a moment that I'll never forget. So there was this preschool outside of Dallas where we lived. And it was a preschool where typical kids went, And then they had a program for kids with autism, and they would try to provide therapy, and they would be around their typical peers, you know, and they hoped that the kids with autism would pick up language and skills, you know, from kids who were developing typically. And so that was kind of the only thing I could find when Jack was like 2 and 3, you know, for him to go to. And so we were paying out of pocket because our insurance wouldn't cover it because he had autism. The school system or early intervention, they were going to pay for that. So we were paying out of pocket for it. It was a lot. And so I remember I was standing in the parking lot of this building where the program was. It was me and 3 other parents just talking about, you know, what we were experiencing. Like one of the families had moved from France to Dallas to attend this program because there was no services in France. 2 of the parents that were standing there, so there were 4 of us, 2 of them had their homes up for sale so they could use the proceeds to pay for the therapy, to pay for the preschool. And I was just, and then I of course thought about the people who don't have a home to sell or people who can't up and move. Like, and I was just like, these kids, you know, it's not any of their doing that they have this diagnosis. And there are things that can help them connect with the world around them, you know, feel more at ease, you know, live their best life. And I was like, it just, you know, I was like, we got to do something about this. So yes, parents, that experience through this journey over the last 12 years, that's people like you. You've made a tremendous difference because you know in your heart what it feels like to be turned away, you know, to be, I used to say, you know, I felt like Jack was being treated like a throwaway kid, like, oh, too bad. We're in the too bad category. And I'm like, no, that's not right. That's just not right. So
I like keeping
anyway,
up. I like keeping up with Jack a little bit on your Facebook too. I know you guys are runners.
we are.
Yeah,
I love it. Yeah.
and I love seeing that Jack is a runner. I can't get Connor to do anything physical. We try. We do some Special Olympic stuff, but I've noticed Jack, he loves it, right?
Yeah. So Jack is like, his nickname when he was little was, we called him Jumper Frog Jack because he kind of just bounded everywhere he goes. And he's kind of like a bull in a china closet and always on the move. I've posted some videos actually on Facebook of him just running up and down the hallway in our house because he just runs back and forth, back and forth. So when he was around 8, 9, he really hit a hard period and he started having self-injurious behavior, aggressions. I mean, just really like it was a painful time for him and for all of us. And so we did lots of things at that point in time. Like we started looking at GI issues to see if he was feeling bad physically. That's when we got his iPad and we started working on augmentative communication rather than just really focusing on talking. You know, we're like, okay, let's give him another voice to use, things like that. But I also said, you know, I'm not an athletic person at all. Like I was in band and the play when I was in high school, but I do like to run just because I like to eat for one thing, a lot. And running for me is very calming. You know, I don't run very fast or anything like that, but it just makes me feel better. So I said, you know what, let's put 30 minutes of cardiovascular activity into Jack's IEP. And we did. And so I'm like, let's just see what happens. So they started him walking like on the treadmill at school. And then they started doing the gym. And then we kind of started working our way to a walk run thing after school. And then it just grew into where he ran his first 5K, which so cool, super cool. So he eventually did so well that he was able to run with our high school cross country team. And he's run the last 2 years. He has a guide that he runs with, or some guides, they kind of alternate. And he actually last year ran the home course a couple of times without a guide, which was just amazing. So it's been an opportunity for him to connect with his peers, to feel better. It's funny too, because he's super typical. There's some days where he can't wait to run, and then there's other days where he's like, no, I'm like, come on, you know, you haven't run in a couple of days, let's go. Well, you'll feel better once you're out there. So anyway,
I
it's
think I think that's cool. I mean, the fact that he's found something physical that he likes to do. So tell me.
yeah. I would say, Cody, too, before you go on though,
Oh, go ahead.
I think kids are different. So for him, we built off just that on the move thing. And I do hear a lot of our kids, are not like really into movement. They're more lethargic. So I think you just got to kind of find what fits for them and what makes them feel better. So it's
Yeah.
time to start some yoga, Cody.
I need that for sure. That's so tell me, okay, let's kind of go back. We met in 2016 when you came to Oklahoma. What brought you to Oklahoma? How did that come about?
So there had been efforts in Oklahoma to pass an autism insurance law for many years, and organizations like Autism Oklahoma and your organization, others, had been involved in trying to get that passed, and it just hit a brick wall. I mean, it was tough. And so I kind of had always heard how difficult it had been through the grapevine. And the mindset was like, Oklahoma's going to be the last state. They're going to be the last ones to pass an autism insurance law. So I heard from some parents from Tulsa who were interested in trying to get an autism insurance law passed. And then I heard there were 3 moms in Oklahoma City, Tara Hood, Michie Medley, and Emily Scott. And so I flew to Oklahoma and I went to Tulsa and I met with the families there. And then the next day I drove down to Oklahoma City. And I had coffee with Michie and Emily. And then I went to Guthrie, Oklahoma, and met with Tara. And Tara, when we met, she also invited her friend, Senator A.J. Griffin, an amazing woman, who was in the Senate. And I expected it to be, oh, we'll think about it or whatever. But they're like, let's go. It's time. I mean, they were so motivated. And as you know, I know you got involved. Oklahoma was incredible. The community was incredible because it's so important that advocacy come from all corners of the state. It can't just be from Oklahoma City or Tulsa. It has to be from Ardmore, it has to be from Duncan, Pauls Valley. It's got to be from all over.
The Potos. Yeah.
Owasso, I guess Owasso is like Tulsa, but
Yeah.
anyway, Chakota. Let's go to Chakota. So it's got to be from everywhere. And so that really is what happened in Oklahoma. Like people just got engaged. And the other thing I did too, you mentioned people's perception of Autism Speaks. And I mean, I think it's some of it is accurate in that it's an organization that was founded in 2005 by some super fancy New York people like Bob and Suzanne Wright. Bob was the chair of NBC Universal. He was the vice chair of General Electric. He was a Madison Avenue guy, right? But they had a grandson, Christian, who was diagnosed with autism. And when that happened, they just rolled up their sleeves and they said, we want to try to find ways to make a difference. And for some people who had been involved in autism for a long time, they're like, who are you? Like, go away, And others kind of merged in with them. So we get territorial in the autism community sometimes, and people have different experiences. There was a lot of focus early on too for a cure. And people over time learned that, autism is a spectrum. Right now, it's divided up into 3 levels. level 1, level 2, level 3. And people who are diagnosed in those different levels have very different experiences. So they all have challenges that they face, for sure. It's not a competition. Everyone has challenges. But, the challenges that you have with level 1, you might not be the kind of person who really wants treatment or a cure, or you might be offended to even have autism, defined in that kind of way, because you see it as your identity, which some of it's good, some of it's not, but if you're like level 3 autism, so level 3, that means you have an IQ of less than 70. So, it's harder. Like, so for instance, Jack's level 3, and I talked about the amazing things he does, but he's also had some really hard times. And I think every day carries a lot. He still is essentially nonverbal. He's really rocking and rolling on his iPad, so that's nice. He doesn't read, he doesn't write. So there are a lot of things that you count on to get through everyday life that they're not part of who Jack is, and it makes it harder for him. So anyway, over time, Autism Speaks did evolve, change the mission statement to try to be respectful of everyone rather than being like, autism's terrible, we want to cure it. Like, no, our community is so much more than that. So we want opportunities, we want acceptance, we want people who need treatments to have access to them. So all of it. So I would encourage those who see people selling t-shirts that say, I hate Autism Speaks or whatever, to go to the website now and see what it says and just think about evolution. I know I've changed. I didn't know jack squat about autism when Jack was diagnosed. I knew nothing. And I've learned so much over the last 15 years. So, and I'm guessing you have too.
Oh, every day. Every
We're
day.
really trying.
Yeah, every day
Yeah.
we learn something new, and just depending on, we do a social group with transitioning students where we help them with social and job skills, and I tell people I learn more from them every day than they do from me. It's the same thing with Connor. Every day I learn something new. But to kind of get back to what you were talking about, so you can find the negative stuff out there, but I always have had this feeling, and this is since I've met you, that Autism Speaks. I love especially your aspect, what you do as far as going out. You really do go out and try to help make life better for people or families that live with autism, and it's because you live with autism every day. So I've always kind of taken that stance when I hear people talk about Autism Speaks, and I say, look, there's a lot of good stuff. There's, besides that, there are grants, there are community grants that are out there. There are all kinds of things that they do to help. And so, it's all about perspective, I guess. And then, like you said, going out and learning the new stuff.
Right. Being open. And then I'll say too that anytime you try to do something, and I'm sure you have experienced this with all the stuff that you do, someone's not going to like it, right? Or there's always going to be the critic, but it's not the critic that counts. It's the man in the arena, who's out there trying to make a difference. Does that mean you're going to be perfect? No. I certainly make mistakes. But I think if you're coming from a place of trying to always learn, and I think it's just important that we always just connect with the community. And that is, people can say what they want about, oh my God, Mark Zuckerberg is evil and I hate social media. Yes, but I feel like for families like ours, connecting like we can, checking in on each other like we can. I have my messenger on Facebook pretty much every day. I hear from some self-advocate, who is just reaching out because they're lonely. like they're more isolated than they should be. You know what I mean? So living those connections, carrying those in your heart, and then just trying to find solutions, you know, it's important.
We talk about the three ladies you talked about that really did push the bill. You know, Tara
Yeah.
is, how amazing is Tara Hood? Still trying to get her on here, and
Oh,
she's
I'll
very,
tell her.
yeah, she's very busy, and I get that. Would love to have her on. I had Emily on not too long ago. We did, um, and I'm working with her. She asked me to be on the Oklahoma Autism Center Foundation plan committee, and so we're working together on that. And she's amazing too. Michi, I have not. She's probably one that I don't work with as much, but I need to, and I need to get her on one of these. I need to give her. I'm
Yeah.
sure she would. Yeah,
Yeah.
but
Yeah. They really were so dedicated. The other person I want to mention too is Jason Nelson, who
oh yeah,
was um, in the house. And Jason had a daughter, Grace, who had cancer as a child. And, you know, they really went through so much with that. And she recovered, which is wonderful. So Jason didn't have anything to do with autism other than he had, I think he heard Temple Grandin speak. But anyway, he was interested in Temple Grandin. So, and then he was very involved with the Lindsay Nicole Henry Scholarship too. So he was super open.
I went through Partners in Policymaking, the Oklahoma Partners in Policymaking advocacy program, and
Awesome.
during that you learn how to speak with legislators, and you have to actually present to legislators, and they bring them in. And Jason
Yes.
Nelson was one of my presenters that I had to present to in that year. So yeah, I think he's great because he was a champion for people with all disabilities, you know, not just autism. So
Yes, he's phenomenal, and he really studies his issue and knows it backwards and forwards. So when I first met Jason, he asked for tons of information, and I gave him, you know, all the information I could on, okay, what is the actual cost of autism coverage? What does this mean? You know, lots of language to use for the bill. And as a legislator, he really took time himself. He didn't depend on his staff or someone else. Like, he really took time to study and ask questions. And I remember kind of feeling intimidated a little, like, oh my gosh, he's never going to sign on to this. So when he told us that he wanted to be our champion in the House, I was just like, I can't believe it. This is amazing. And he gave us his all. AJ Griffin gave us her all in the Senate. And we got that bill through in one session of effort, which it's miraculous.
yeah,
Usually it's
it was
several years. Yeah. So it's
AJ I
incredible.
now work with. She is. I'm on the Governor's Council for Developmental Disabilities, and she is
Oh,
the
the chair.
chair. Yeah, so I work with her now. So yeah, and I think that's interesting. You know, I say this on a lot of things, but what you had talked about earlier, I think the networking between families and between advocates is amazing, because we are a big family. We know each other, we work together, and we help each other. So.
Yeah. Yeah. It's amazing. I will say though, I think some of the best human beings I've ever gotten to work with, I worked with in Oklahoma, like just determined to make it happen, doing it for the right reason because they genuinely cared. And it was not easy. You know, we had some heavy duty opponents.
Yeah,
Um,
I think what was interesting for me, and you probably see this, I don't know, you've been in most of the states, or a lot of the states, working on this stuff. I thought that what was interesting was we saw most of our opposition from uh, the insurance side of things, and former insurance agents who had become legislators, and that's where we really. Do you see that in most states?
yeah, it's usually the health plans for sure, and people in that industry, because they're genuinely worried about cost. They're really scared about that. The nice thing about Oklahoma, coming along later, is we had lots of information from other states about what the cost really looks like. And as you and I both know, and we kind of already talked about a little, autism's a really diverse kind of diagnosis. And so some people might need ABA, others don't. Some people might need speech, and the amount is very different depending on what you need at the time, how old you are, all those things. So the cost was much less than projected. And so we had that conversation. The other thing I did is when I started working in Oklahoma, I went and met with all the autism organizations and said, hey guys, like, I want to work with you. If y'all are interested in working on this, let's get together. I didn't want to just stomp in and say, hey, I'm Autism Speaks and you better do what I say. No. So I really wanted to engage with the different organizations. So we reached out, and then we also reached out to the people we knew who were going to be against us. So like, for instance, the Daily Oklahoman had in previous years had written these horrific op-eds against autism insurance, and it was really negative. And so we went and met with him. We met with the editorial board, we met with them. And one thing we did was we convinced the Daily Oklahoman to cover autism in their own health plan, because they weren't, which was so awesome. And then we also got them to back off. And we also met with the Tulsa World, with their op-ed department, just working to get good information out, and doing it in a really cordial way. Like, we never were negative. Guys, these are just the basics. It doesn't cost what you think it does. It's going to be okay. And so in Oklahoma, I think there's that kind of level of trust that you have to have, credibility. And so everybody came together and made it happen. It was really incredible.
Yeah.
Really incredible.
I thought it was pretty impressive, because we kind of, I don't know if you had this feeling, but I felt like we were going in the first time to try to just at least get the foot in the door and say, hey, this is what we're planning to do. And then it went through. And
I know. I told Tara and Emily, it's going to be probably 3 years. It's going to take us 3 years. Because usually what you do is, like, the first year I come in, we'll file the bill, and you're kind of just familiarizing everybody. And in Oklahoma, you've got term limits, so you got to constantly re-educate people. And then the second year, your opposition really kicks your booty. And then the third year, you know what to expect from the opposition, so you can be ready and you can probably get it done, So 3 or 4 years is generally what it takes. So it was phenomenal, but everybody came together and they worked so hard, and they sent the emails and they came to the Capitol, and it was amazing. Yeah, I mean, Oklahomans should be really, really proud of what they did. I am.
I'm thankful for you for coming in and leading up, the charge on that, because without you, I don't know that anything would have gotten that far. I know that that's true.
Well, I will say, so I loved every minute of it. I would fly in and get in my rental car, and I would turn on Hank FM, which I think that's what it's called, Hank FM. And there would always be some old school country on, which reminded me so much of my granny and my papa, my Oklahoma family. And then I would be there. Usually I would spend one night, be there, for a couple days, and then go back home. Because with Jack, like, I can be gone like one night, maybe two, and then I've got to be back. Like, he has a hard time if I'm gone longer than that. So I kind of had the travel all figured out. I never told any of the legislators that I didn't live there. Like, I was just there. And I'm like, hey, I spent a lot of time walking barefoot on the red clay down there, near like Kingston, Oklahoma. So it's okay. Anyway, and the food, oh my gosh, the best. I love eating in Oklahoma.
Let's let's talk about as you brought this up, and I meant to talk about this. So one of the last times you and I talked, I don't remember the last time, but one of the last times you were coming to Poto.
Car.
Yes, you remember this, don't you? So I'm gonna,
Also that day.
yeah, I'm gonna
I
set
got
this.
makeup.
I'm going to set this up because you were coming to Poto. You were going to meet with some families here and talk about what they needed to do to kind of get in touch with the legislators, what the ABA was about. No, this was how.
After.
Yeah, this was after, because this was how we can use them.
Yes, I wanted them to know how to use it. And
That's
there
right.
was really bad weather, which you're from Oklahoma. You're like, no, it wasn't. You're fine.
Well, I will say this. I'm pretty sure there was a tornado that day, and
Yeah.
you called me about Shakota, I think, and said, I can't make it any further.
Yeah, I was worried because I was in a rental blowing all around. And as a little girl, I remember one time being in Kingston, Oklahoma. My granny and papa had a trailer down there. Like all my relatives had, like Uncle Joe had a trailer across the street. Granny and papa had a trailer down on the lake. And like there was a tornado. And I remember, like the tornado coming over the trailers. I'm like, this is like, I literally have been in that experience. I was sleeping in bed with my little sister. She wet the bed. I'll never forget that. Like, so just, I know what Oklahoma tornadoes can do. So that night I felt terrible. And I also thought too, these hardy Oklahomans are going to be like, girl, you wimped out on us. What are you doing? So we
As
still
I
need to schedule. I still feel bad about that.
Well, as I remember, and I may be wrong on this, but if I remember, there really was a tornado that came through that night. So no, I don't. I would, and I don't make fun of anybody, anyways. I mean, I've lived here most of my life. I grew up in Kansas City and then moved here when I was 12, but I've been here since I was 12, and um, it's nothing to play with. I mean, we stand out on our front porch and watch it, but you don't mess around with it. So
That's right. So anyway, and now I live in Boston, which is like, my life is so weird,
yeah,
but
no,
it's so good to get back to Oklahoma. I loved it. I loved every minute of it. I loved the people. For me, it just fed my soul. It meant so much to be there. So I'm so glad. And not only did we get the private health insurance piece done, um, although, there's still some advocacy we want to do around that because it covers the large group plans, but for the small businesses, those were left out because the National Federation of Independent Businesses, the NFIB, had a really strong lobby and they were worried about the cost for small businesses. So if you have 50 employees or less, it wasn't included. The Obamacare plans were not included. So there's some coverage gaps that still need to be fixed when the time is right. So that's still open and we still got to do it. The other thing that needed to be worked on was Medicaid coverage having the same. So kids who are on Medicaid, and lots of kids in Oklahoma are on Medicaid. So we started to work on that pretty much right away. And the Medicaid coverage for kids under the age of 21 went into effect last June was really when it went into effect. And it's rolling out, we're still trying to make sure people are having access issues, all that kind of stuff. But I'm still in touch with the providers in Oklahoma. A lot of them, they'll email me and say, oh, we're getting denied for this, or they're asking for that. And we just kind of work through those problems because the whole point is just to try to get help to people. So there's still work to do, but we've come a long, long way.
yeah. I want to end with a couple of things. I usually ask advocates, who are your mentors? Who helped you along the way to get where you're at?
So I'd say I got 3 people. I'll be fast. So one is my government teacher in high school, who was also our football coach. But he was, oh, this sounds terrible. He was our football coach, but he was actually really smart too. And so I took history from him throughout high school. And then when government came around, everybody was like scared of him. And they're like, oh my God, Coach George is so hard. Oh, you know, scared to death. But I did really well in his classes. Um, but, you know, like I had my best friend in high school was like the homecoming queen and super popular. And I was just kind of always in her shadow. She was very smart too. So I was in government class and I just enjoyed it. Like I really liked it. I did well. And at the end of the year, I was sitting in our school assembly and they announced the government award and I won the government award like in high school. And I was totally like, what? Did you call the wrong name? Like I never expected that. But I was like, wow, yeah, I guess I really do have an aptitude for this. So, and Coach George saw that, you know, and he recognized that I had that. And so that kind of planted the seed. So he was a mentor that taught me the basics of here's how you pass a law, you know, here's what the Constitution says, you know, so planted that seed. Then I will say Lori Unum, who was the woman from South Carolina who was working on her autism insurance law at the same time I was working on mine in Texas. We both started at Autism Speaks at the same time. So she's miles ahead of me. Like she had been a law professor at George Washington. Like she's like this brilliant combination of this South Carolinian beauty pageant woman who's, you know, a law professor, like, you know, but she just taught me how to advocate. She is phenomenal. She's intelligent. She also knows how to work both sides of the aisle. Like she knows how to do it. And so just working with her, watching her, even to this day, like I learned so much from her. And so Lori definitely was a mentor. The other person who is by far the most influential is Jack. Like Jack has taught me to step back and, you know, see the strengths, work hard to get the appropriate services, you know, and so he has just taught me that I can do hard things. He does hard things every day. And it's so worth it. So he's definitely the top of the list.
What's maybe the best piece of advice you've ever received, or what advice do you give families when you talk to them? And that can be
So
general.
when it Yeah, so I'll say when it comes to advocacy, I believe in positive advocacy. I don't ever, no matter how angry you get, you know, there's a scripture that I have to remind myself all the time. It's be angry and sin not, right? So I get angry and I get motivated by anger sometimes, you know, disparity, you know, just there are bad people in this world too. You know, there are people who don't value people with autism. There are people who discriminate. I get mad, but I never carry that into a meeting. I don't carry that into a hearing. I'm not going to write an email like that. I believe in knowing your issue, making your case, being positive, always in your messaging, relentlessly positive, stay at it, and you will win if you don't give up. So that for advocacy, whenever I see, and there's so much negativity that's warranted, like I'm like, yeah, I understand why you're angry. I just don't think it ever works that much. You know, it's kind of like drinking poison. So I like to stay positive in my advocacy, work towards solutions, and never give up. So there's that. And then I'd say just for our families, um, oh, that's hard. I just, I don't know what advice I would give, except for me, there have been many times where I was in a stressful time with autism and I felt like it was bigger than me, out of control. And I felt like that's how it was going to be forever. But things always change. It's kind of, you know, it's a roller coaster. And so nothing is permanent, you know, so you may have a really bad day. You may not sleep for nights on end. You may feel like you're in just a really bad spot. You will turn the corner. Now, I don't know what's around the corner, but you'll turn it and there'll be something else. And sometimes it's a little smooth for a while, and sometimes it's just some other issue, but it's just nothing is permanent. So just keep that in mind.
Well, I appreciate your friendship. You know, I think I'm lucky to have been able to run in, you know, across your path at some point here, and I do appreciate what you do, not just for families in Oklahoma, families all across the United States. I know you work really hard. I try to keep up with you as much as possible because you're all over the place.
Wild. Yes. It's
Yeah,
wild.
but
It's so funny. Like one day I'll be in Oklahoma and then the next time like in New York. It's just so weird. It's super weird.
but I want to thank you and thank you for your time. I know you're very busy, so thank you for carving out a few
Sure.
minutes. So um,
Anytime except when there's a tornado. Then I'm under the desk.
fair, fair enough.
Cody, it's great to see you. I'm glad this worked.